First of all, I wanted to thank TT for putting on a great symposium. This is a fantastic event. This is actually the first time I've attended it, and very impressed by the caliber of the speakers and the presentations here today. So thank you for asking me to participate. I arrived yesterday, took a break from the farm over in Nebraska to make my way to the big city and talk to you guys a little bit about data-driven design and some of the things I'm looking at. And just to kind of give you an idea of my trajectory as a professional, maybe a little bit idea of my background, my love for a lot of this stuff really does stem from a love of the design process. I'm trained as an architectural designer. I love great design. I think design has the ability to greatly impact the world that we live in and address many problems. I then kind of made a turn and kind of joined CASE. And as a director at CASE, learned a ton about opportunities for extending the use of building information modeling and data to kind of drive transformative services for the industry, which brings me to where I'm at today. I've recently launched my new company, Proving Ground, which is really looking at that intersection between buildings and data. And I like the contrast of this statement as kind of a departure point to talk about some of the things I'm doing today. This idea that buildings are slow, expensive, and risky. Data is fast, cheap, and can provide levels of certainty. And I think there's this opportunity for data to inform and provide some level of solution to a lot of the problems that do plague our industry. If we look at things like project budgets and schedules, we're still looking at these statistics where 70% of all building projects run over schedule and over budget. We're, I think, grappling as an industry about what this new medium, the new mediums that we're working with, actually mean for us. And so as kind of an entrepreneur, as a new business owner, I'm really looking at building services around these concepts and figuring out, what new ways of providing service to the industry can we use to drive innovation. I think we're seeing that on the product side, and I think we're going to need to see that on the kind of delivery and service side as well. So this is kind of the intersection of a couple of different things that I'm looking at. As it relates to kind of core competencies, building information modeling is not going away. It's like kind of I like to think about it as the core database schema for our industry at the moment. It's kind of foundational to how architects and engineers are using data. Computation, we've seen a lot of great computational design work here at this symposium. This ability to apply novel computing concepts to solve real-world problems, automate workflows. Simulation, this idea of measuring our designs before they're built and understanding the implications of various problems, and analytics. So making sense of it all. I like to think about analytics as being able to use all the data that we're kind of gathering, creating, simulating, storing, and provide us with trajectories and insight. As far as my services are concerned, I mean, I'm kind of, this is where I think I can provide a little bit of a different perspective. A lot of what I'm talking about and we're going to be talking about is in many ways aligns with what we're seeing happening internally to various organizations. By kind of stepping out into this space of consulting, I see this opportunity to kind of look across the industry. A lot of my clients include architects, engineers, doing a lot of work with fabricators and prefabrication folks. Really looking at this from multiple perspectives. How can we provide data-driven process as a service, both from a strategic perspective, informing how organizations are calibrating themselves to be more data-driven? How can we build up the front lines through education and skill sets, through workshops, training, curriculum, all that, and then projects. A lot of my projects do stem from this idea of building custom solutions, custom tools, kind of software development for hire. So to quickly go through a couple of concepts, sourcing data is of paramount interest. I think with the availability of APIs and all of the multitude of sources that are available to any given designer today, we need to figure out how we can source this information in order to fully leverage it. I always like to emphasize that organizations need to determine for themselves what data is important because just about any kind of data is out there for us to leverage. So kind of prioritizing it, figuring out what you need and what you can do with it. This is a demonstration or kind of a look at global weather data and design conditions, and visualized and kind of using visualization to provide a sense of clarity to that very complex data set. This might come in the form of better using, sourcing data about program in order to better understand kind of the breakdowns of very complicated arrangements of programs and spaces in a design. This is a commercial complex, and then using a piece of software called Tableau, which has actually become very popular in accounting and finance, applying that kind of tool to the building industry in order to very quickly start slicing and dicing the data at your disposal. For those of you who kind of follow my blog and look and kind of have looked at some of the work that I did at Case, very interested in this idea of interoperability and defining workflows that allow us to move data more efficiently. Super fascinated by the work that Flux is doing and kind of how they're looking at integrating multiple sources. I think that I'm kind of a both and individual when it comes to interoperability. I think kind of these kind of more centralized scalable schemas are important, but also point to point. Interoperability continues to be a tactical problem that we're seeing on teams. This is actually the first Rhino demonstration I made like kind of mid last year. And it actually involved, and I'll just kind of rewind this really quick because it kind of got away from me. It actually involved migrating two-dimensional plans into three-dimensional BIM. So there was like this client that had all of these 2D plans, and they wanted to look at automation strategies for taking that information, slicing it up, consuming it, and then automating the creation of a very coarse and proof of concept building information model. So Rhino facilitated that kind of migration from 2D into BIM. And by setting up this custom framework, the end goal was to auto-generate something of greater intelligence than what was kind of provided in the plan, which can now be archived, could be mined, and can be kind of consumed within a building information database. Interested in other kind of workflows and opportunities. This is a custom library that was built for one of my clients to look at RAM integration within Dynamo. So this is actually kind of reading live a RAM database, pulling it into Dynamo, and then mapping this geometry to actual Revit elements to facilitate interoperability and data exchange. This one isn't something that's kind of widely available. It was kind of an initial proof of concept, and is looking to kind of continue development on this here pretty soon. And so a lot of those kind of deal with computational tools. I think there's opportunities to kind of build very simple tools that address these kind of interoperability problems. This is an add-in I've been working on that basically automates, uses a lot of the core Rhino technology and OpenNURBS, but instead of passing it through Dynamo, it's kind of automating the translation of this geometry, batch importing it into Rhino as families, and allowing kind of designers that may not be versed in computation to kind of take advantage of this. I'm really looking at those simple tools that can impact people on the front lines. Very interested in this idea of data for insight. If we can continuously measure design earlier on in our process, and we can kind of simulate our design, how can we actually understand the data that we're generating in order to make better decisions? So I don't think, there's all these tools on the market now that allow us to kind of front-end simulation kind of as early as concept and even pre-design. But how can we begin to make sense of it? So one of the areas I'm really looking at is how we can build flexible dashboards and tools that can be client-facing as well as being used by project managers and project architects in order to take advantage of the data that their design team is generating. And that might also include just a very basic data visualization tools that are targeted at specific issues. This is looking at energy analysis data, and instead of kind of leaving it up to the designer to kind of wrangle this data every single time, kind of a repeatable tool that allows them to kind of compare options very quickly. One of the things I like to emphasize in a lot of my talks about data-driven design, data-driven process, it's very easy to get caught up in the actual technology and the process. I'm a person that really likes to focus on outcomes. So we're moving all this data, we're generating all this data, we're sourcing it, but what does it actually amount to? What is it going to allow us to do to solve a real problem in a very convincing and provocative way? So this is an example of a project I did at Case. I've presented this to groups before, you may have seen it. This is a louver system study. Snowhetta had designed this amazing idea for a kind of a hatch pattern type of louver, very much driven by aesthetics and concept, but they did have some very strict performance criteria to meet. So their initial model was, a loose concept, not at all driven by kind of analysis or anything like that. And so we plugged in and built a system that would allow them to operate within kind of a range of performance criteria. So we kind of studied various conditions, we iterated through a wide range of options as related to spacing, rotation, angle, and all of that, so they could achieve the aesthetic concept but still meet their performance criteria. This is kind of a mapping of all of those solutions, and the areas that are highlighted green begin to indicate areas where they can comfortably begin to operate in and be flexible with and know that they're meeting kind of some minimum criteria. And so through this iterative process and then kind of measuring their original concept against the result, not only were they kind of improving the overall system and the ability to kind of shade the building, I think there was like a 20% gain in effectiveness of the solar shading system, but it also reduced the structural weight of the overall system by 20%. So there's this kind of very clear and tangible outcome that came from as an outcome of an iterative process and one that was driven by data. And one of the, as a kind of a consultant and someone that's really interested in providing kind of service, I'm very much interested in this idea of how we equip people. I think one of the biggest areas of opportunity in terms of how an industry or how a company can begin to drive innovation is to look at these concepts from the standpoint of the engine that drives any organization, the people in them. This is a contrast of two workshops that I always really like to compare and contrast. Same organization, very different groups of people, same technology, but yet a very different discussion. Here off to the left-hand side, you have corporate executives, operational managers, design leaders at HDR participating in a Grasshopper workshop and talking about the impacts these new technologies have on staff. And then on the right-hand side, you have what you're kind of more familiar with and probably what we'll see over this weekend, kind of more of a workshop style, hackathon style engagement with the people that are actually doing the work. And I'm interested in where these two things intersect and meet. And so some of the things I'm looking at from this perspective is how do you actually begin to measure knowledge in an organization as it relates to technology? Can we apply data-driven concepts to understand what an organization knows about technology so we can make targeted recommendations and targeted tactics that address knowledge gaps in a company in a very specific way, instead of just broadly stating, everyone needs Revit training or everyone needs Grasshopper training. No, well, actually they don't. What we need to do is determine where are the areas of knowledge that are going to be most impactful, and things like this can begin to surface some of that. Also very interested in process change. A number of the clients right now that I'm working with deals less with coding or creating custom tools, but more about managing change on projects and changes in organizations as it relates to new project management styles and process. One of the areas that Case really started to kind of invest in and look at from a process perspective is this idea of agile project management that is very kind of distinct and different than what you might consider from a traditional project management structure. Specifically, this is a Scrum board that was developed for an internal initiative at HDR, wherein we're kind of creating iterative cycles, iterating through problems, outlining sprints. I think we can talk a little bit more of this on the panel, but really looking at how we can apply not only kind of the concepts from like software engineering, like I see kind of computational design as this weird middle space between design and software engineering. I think there's this opportunity to also adapt process from what we're seeing in the IT world and the software world to buildings in order to improve efficiency, improve collaboration, improve the ability for us to deliver projects on time and on budget, and also be highly iterative with our clients. Some crazy quote from Wired. I think we're kind of all sick of hearing about data by now, but I think it's very interesting, this idea that data really is a thing that is driving our economy right now. Companies want to know how they can get it, they want to know how they can leverage it, and how they can be used to actually improve their business and organization. So thank you very much.